right, so here we go, guys. I am actually having a lot of fun with this. I've had a lot of fun. I have been sending some pictures back and forth of screenshots with some Hyperion friends from over the years. So this has been something that's been really fun for me. And I think what's been most fun about this was that this was the very first presentation I ever gave, the very first white paper I ever wrote, and I had never even heard of a conference, let alone a Hyperion conference, when I submitted for this and got accepted. So off to OD-Tug I went, and I submitted this in 2010, and then 2011 was when I actually presented this, and I was overwhelmed and intrigued and sucked in all in this one fell swoop. So if any of you have been to a Hyperion conference or an OD-Tug conference or any kind of conference for that matter, you certainly understand what I mean. So like I said, had a lot of fun reprising this. I have a lot of slides, but a lot of them are pictures. So this is meant to be fun. I think the throwback channel was supposed to be fun, kind of laugh at yourself, or maybe not. But kind of see how things have changed just over a decade. So the impetus behind this was I was writing a white paper for my company at the time. It was a lot of users were still on Add-In, but then SmartView, we had net new customers who were using SmartView. And for me, someone who did a lot of VBA coding on the back end of Add-In, how to migrate that over to SmartView. So the bulk of this presentation was kind of around VBA, but it wasn't necessarily totally there. So if you're on and you've never done any VBA coding in SmartView, don't go anywhere. This is actually a lot of fun because we get to see, because there was conversations I've had that, you know, people hated SmartView. It's going to go away. They're just going to keep changing it. And I'm going to skip to the end here and say that's not true. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get going. So by the way, I work for Oracle. I didn't do any Oracle slides because if you don't know who Oracle is, then I don't know why you're here. All good. So I am a principal architect in the analytics and data warehousing group with Oracle. So I am on the sales engineering side, but I work very, very closely with dev and product management and customers. I'm on customer calls about 10 hours a day. And there's likely many of you who are on this call here who have actually worked with me. So I don't just go in and then leave. I actually work with customers from the pre-sales to the post-sales process, and love my job. So that's me. I am the author of Real Try Geek. It used to be EPM Queen, but then I moved on from EPM to doing OAC, and then Essbase got thrown back in that mix. So I'm back there, and also data science. So fun fact, I actually have a degree in statistics and am getting an advanced degree in it as well. So I really do love analytics and everything about it. I am not just an Oracle employee. I've been an Oracle customer, but I've also been an Oracle partner as well. So I sat on all sides of the coin, and so I understand what positions that people are in. So I'm a former ACE director for the EPM and BI suite. Obviously, don't ask me about their database stuff. Don't ask me about, I mean, I know a little bit about Apex, but certainly not anything to help out. So don't ask me about that. And I've been a SmartView user since 2010. So that is important in this because I started using Essbase around 2005. So I used the add-in for 5 years before I jumped in on this. And you guys are probably wondering, why am I in my old US Air Force uniform? Well, that's going to come up in a minute. It's not just because I'm feeling nostalgic and need to throw it back on. There actually is a reason behind it. So I couldn't find all my patches, but it's close enough. So like I said, let's be nostalgic. This is that track, right? So I like looking at the old documentation and seeing the cube, because even when I talk about Essbase, this is how I explain it. So since I'm wearing the Air Force uniform right now, I thought this was fun. The very first time I had anything to do with the Air Force, I was probably about 4 or 5. You can tell from the clothes that people are wearing that this was not the 2000s by any stretch of imagination, or 90s or anything. But here I am flying a helicopter because my dad did work with the Air Force. So just fun tidbit. So like I said, I gave this presentation in 2011, but I actually wrote the white paper and created the presentation in 2010. And you can see that there's probably a lot that's been changed. So not necessarily just in the SmartView, but also see my name's changed, my company's changed, my position has changed, my Twitter handle has changed. So, but what has not changed is I still talk to customers about migrating from the add-in to SmartView. I do get this about 5 or 6 times a year. And no lie, right before I shut down my email to give this presentation, I got an email from a rep saying, hey, customer is concerned because their add-in isn't working and they don't want to move to SmartView. What are their options? We're going to go into that. There's not many options, I can tell you that. So like I said, I get this every day, and I just want to, put my hands, you've had a long time. So let's be honest. And if you guys know Opal Alapet, I was sending these pictures to her. What do I miss about the Excel add-in? It's on for me. It's that muscle memory with I can still do the muscles to do the Essbase drop down and then picking retrieve or send or whatever. But I miss the simplicity. There certainly was a simplicity to the Essbase add-in. That's not to be missed. However, the problem is it only did Essbase, right? It didn't really do all those other features as well. So in 2006, why was SmartView needed? Well, Hyperion had a whole breadth of tools. It wasn't just Essbase, even though we know and love the add-in, but the reality is the add-in was the next generation of the way to pull data back from the Essbase database. So unless you really love writing report scripts or like having finance people write pseudo code, if you will, this add-in was better. But then SmartView just kind of took it to the next level. So with Hyperion, they released SmartView with their version 9 essentially, but it supported back to version 4 and 7 for depending on the tool that you were working with. So if we have a little bit of fun here about the tools that it supported out of the gate back in when it was first released, here we have HFM, Hyperion Financial Management, and I'll be the first to tell you I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not dangerous enough to write a consolidation script, plan for you or whatever. But I mean, it did its job, right? So SmartView connected to HFM. It also connected to planning. So you can even go back to version 4. I had to throw in Pillar in here just because it's fun. But I certainly worked with planning quite a bit, right? This was really the first opportunity that you had to bring in SmartView, to bring in the planning web forms into Excel. And so that's a big win for the end users, whereas they couldn't do this before, and certainly not with the Essbase add-in. There's also Essbase, right? You have version 7, and that was the first one that I truly worked with. That's what I did my training on, even though I had worked on version 6 as well with App Manager or AppMan, if we're being really nostalgic with some people on the phone here. But it worked with Essbase as well. And so not only just version 7, but our version 9 analytics services, and we can all agree that we were not going to have Essbase renamed analytics services. Everybody for Essbase raised their hand, and we won out, thankfully, because there's no way I was calling it that. But it's still connected to that. So if anybody, to be honest, I still have discussions with customers who are still using Web Analysis or Analyzer. They changed the name with the versioning here. But that's really one of the, not necessarily a predecessor, but it kind of went along with what would be now the Analytics Cloud or OBIE in the past. But it worked really, really well with Hyperion tools. So if you have generational type tools, it understood those relationships. And so you can see a lot of these visualizations aren't too far off from what we have in the Analytics Cloud, but it's still there. So PS, if you're on Web Analysis or Analyzer, this is dead, you need to move. Talk to me afterwards. And then there was also HFR, financial reporting, reports, whatever you want to call it. I still call it all of those, to be honest with you. Love or hate this tool, it has a real purpose. If you're a developer of these reports, you hate it. If you're an end user of it, you love it because it's just, I mean, once you get it up and going, it works. But what was really nice about SmartView is you had the opportunity to bring these reports into Excel. So you could take them in as an Excel, or you didn't necessarily have to view these as PDF or have to go to Workspace to try to download these. You could actually bring them in directly into SmartView. And so I'm going to pause there because hopefully you could see why Hyperion, eventually Oracle, we kept moving forward with SmartView, is that the add-in worked for Essbase. And so if you wanted to be myopic in how you access your data, you could stay with that. But the reality is that SmartView opened up a lot of things on the back end. It gave you a lot of opportunities internally as well to be able to do analyses on different tabs from different sources, but just have one integration tool. So I had a lot of fun with this, like I said, but I went back and talked to Matt Malella, who was the SmartView product manager back in 2010, 2011. So what's funny about it, and I told him this, and he said he was laughing, crying, was that I went up there to give the presentation, this very first one, and I thought I had an hour's worth of material. And I ended up having about 20 minutes. I didn't know what I was doing, but then I saw him walk in, and I had learned throughout the week, because I think I was on the last day, the last slot, because they're like, new person, let's put them at the end. But I ended up having standing room only, which made my stomach absolutely turn. And then I saw him walk in, and I realized that he was the the SmartView product manager, and I just wanted to hurl because I was so nervous. But to be honest, I mean, here I am 10 years later, and him and I have a great relationship. And so I asked him, hey, remember 10 years ago? He did not. He didn't remember all the details, but remember 10 years ago, I gave this presentation. Can you look at it and give me some of your thoughts? And so he gave me some of these interesting tidbits from what's happened basically since 2011. Some of these a little bit before, but feel free to follow him. He's now the VP of UI, Analytics UI at Oracle, so he's still around. So the biggest thing when he was looking at mine, he said, SmartView is 2 words. I think I only stopped putting it as 1 word about a year ago. So if you are putting SmartView together as 1 word, I did it because of me, I'm sorry. It's actually 2 words. But then he told me, he said the actual genesis of SmartView actually came in 2004 because there were so many add-ins at the time. It wasn't just Hyperion at the time. It was, you know, Microsoft had theirs, and then XYZ had theirs. And so really SmartView was a place to be able to combine all these different add-ins together. And if you think about all the different tool sets that I said that SmartView can encompass, those used to be different add-ins. So they started the project and got funding to bring these together as to one, not to mention also security as well. So now it supports HTTPS versus just HTTP. And so one thing that he said today, and I wanted to go ahead and quote it, and I'm going to quote it again, is that he said, it's amazing to me that after 20 years of companies and products trying to kill the spreadsheet, that they're still a contributing factor for analysis in every company. And I think we would all agree with that. And it's funny because I still talk with customers. I was on the phone with a customer right before I started here that they have a whole bunch of spreadsheets, and the problem is they're getting spreadsheets that are XLS instead of SLSX. And they're trying to figure out a way to handle this. And in my head, I'm going, why don't we, get away from Excel altogether? But they're more concerned about the SLS versus SLSX. So by the way, this isn't going away. It's a common problem. So let's go ahead and give people the tools to still be able to connect to that one version of the truth. By the way, the death announcement for the add-in was 7 years ago, soon to be 8 years ago. People, it's dead, it's end of life. So if you haven't moved over yet, you really need to get onto it, because the reality is you could have one operating system dot update, you could have one Word Office update, and would kill all that. And so really at this point, the security risk, if you want to access your data or not, really comes down to this. And so afterwards, if you want to take this presentation, happy for you to take it. I have the announcement link, so you know that I'm not joking around with you. And something that I didn't know and I found out just this morning, is that Matt told me that the original SmartView product name was Hyperion Office Analysis Suite. And I told him there are way too many S's, and then I'm glad that marketing was like, get out of here. So I think SmartView is a lot better term, although some other companies still use it. So if you Google SmartView, it's not going to be just Oracle SmartView. So you may want to do Oracle SmartView. That might help you out. It was also interesting. This was one case scope that I did not go back to during the time, because something about getting married that same weekend, I chose that as a priority instead, was that, and I actually remember this, I remember watching the video of this, back in 2012, Oracle was actually focused on trying to get SmartView for the cloud data. So if you had a Google Docs, or really kind of like that genesis of what is now Office 365, they wanted to offer support. The problem is that they got such negative response and feedback in 2012 saying nobody's ever going to put their data, there's just so much outcry that the funding was actually cut to support, say like what is now Office 365 support, or Google Docs support, Google Sheets, whatever, which is funny because, what goes around comes around. So it really wasn't such a fad. And to be honest with you, I saw that and I was like, well, I don't know if any of us will ever use it. However, today I use a Mac and with Office 365, and I have to run a separate VM that costs Oracle about, a few $100s a year just so I can access SmartView. So I digress. Actually, I don't digress yet. So something else he also sent me was that in 2014 is when Hyperion was formally dropped from the name. So it became just Oracle SmartView for Office in 2014, and it looks like April 16th, 2014 was the release date. And yes, Hyperion was cool because they had a hashtag or a pound sign for us old people back before it was pound signs were cool. So let's go into my presentation from 2011, and what I've decided to do is everything that has changed or that is now doesn't apply, I've decided to just put a smart strike through it. So this comes back to, why am I in my Air Force uniform? It is because when I was creating this white paper, these instructions for my company at the time, for other consultants to use, I kind of equated it to going to basic training, because there are certain ways that you talk, walk, all these different pieces that have to be, they're very almost formulaic, right? And so I just kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm back at basic training. That time I was a lot closer to basic training than I am now, although I am happy to say that my uniform still fits. I'm even wearing the pants. They are not tight. So I am happy to say that after 15 to 20 years, it doesn't appear that I have, changed pant size, which I'm very happy about to say that. So let's go ahead and dive into Essbase Add-In to SmartView migration, right? So now we know SmartView is two separate words. So let's have a little bit of fun. So I'll be honest with you, what I did is I took my slides and just copied them over, and I didn't do any kind of formatting changes or any kind of word changes or anything else like that. I just kind of brought it in as is. I thought that would be fun. So as I was saying, there is a presentation format. And when I say a presentation, I'm talking about, if you think about the Air Force or something, the way you present yourself, whether it be marching. And for me, that was kind of connecting. How do you move from one to another? How do you really make that connection to make that work? How do you interact? So responding to the drill instructors, there's only, I believe, it's been a long time, 5 ways that you can respond back. And so over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, you can only really say 5 things. It gets really old. But also there's this normalizing feature, like when you're taking your spreadsheets and you're trying to convert them from the add-in to SmartView, what are some things you need to do to clean up, if you will, from the add-in? And then finally, when you're performing, right? So you're starting to perform as a team, meaning your reports are starting to function in the new SmartView format from add-in. What does that really look like? All right. So and then we're going to go to a little bit of conclusion, the former conclusion and the current conclusion, if you will. So I gave this introduction. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I think it is fun that so with Essbase 19C coming out, so we're on 19.3. If you're on the, so 19 stands for 2019, which is the code line year, and then C stands for cloud. So if you heard earlier today, 21C for on-premises and cloud is coming here in the next few months. So that's something to look forward to. And then I've done a lot of different things. So, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but Essbase is really growing, as well as the other EPM tools, which I've been listening in on. So let's go forward here. So here, like I was saying, so we're going to learn to march. We're going to connect to SmartView, right? So there's a lot is different. So remember, I'm sure many of you are out there who have the finger memory still going. Mine's still hot from 10 years ago. I can still go to Essbase, log in, I'll do that. I'm doing this on the side that you can't see. But there's different ways you have to connect to SmartView. It's not wrong, it's just different. And honestly, with the enhanced security behind it, there's different methods or additional methods to connect. And then there's also the interaction between SmartView and VBA. There's a process of transitioning to everything else to SmartView VBA, which is what I said on the previous slide. So clearly this is my first presentation ever, because I said two things twice. So let's be a little bit nostalgic here. And so at the time I wasn't being nostalgic, but if you think about when you logged in prior, you only really needed to have about 5 pieces of information. You needed to enter in your server, and choose from a list, whether it be prod, dev, and whatever. And by the way, that is very dangerous. If having been an admin before and choosing from a drop-down list, if I was really tired at 3 a.m. because my Essbase queue blew up, whatever. But choosing the correct server, you needed your username, your password, what application and what database did you want. And that's all you needed. If you want to change the password, you could do it right from that screen. So there certainly was a simplicity to it that with SmartView got added. So before that was a drop-down list, and then now in SmartView you actually have a full ribbon. Initially, when the SmartView first came out, it was another drop-down, right? It was essentially another add-in, but with the advent of additional releases of Microsoft Office, then you had this ribbon that was actually very nice. So here you actually have to go to choose to connect. And as you can see in the screen here is that you can already see that there is the BI server. So if you had OBIEE, you could connect to that. You can connect to Essbase and planning, and it's kind of all listed there for you. So no longer was it just 5 things you need to enter and you were connected, but now you actually needed to choose, like hit once. If I go you hit this connect button, which still isn't different, but it looks a little bit different, right? Icons update and change. Hopefully it's been 10 years. We want that. But now you need to choose actually what you're connecting to. And it's funny, at the time, we thought this was a little bit more complex, you know, having to choose what you wanted to connect to and then entering your username and password. But if you think about today for the cloud, when we go and we log in, depending on if you're on premises, you'll have something look pretty similar to this. It's not that dissimilar. But if you're on the cloud now, you're actually going to be launched over to Oracle's login site. So whether that be for EPM SaaS or the ERP cloud, or whether that be for analytics, Essbase, whatever, you're essentially going to be brought to Oracle's Identity Cloud Service login. So it's similar, but it's not, and it's same, but it's not, but it's still the same concept, but it's still not on one screen like we had before. So then here, I mean, from before we, or this is the smart view like 10 years ago. Here you can either choose the cube that you want to connect to, the application and the database name. And then if you think about of course I'm going back in memory because I don't have the Essbase Add-In anymore, you could just choose one cube, and then all of a sudden, once you chose your cube, clicked OK, then all your dimensions showed up. So in Smart View, what you actually had to do was you had to open up the application name, and then you had to right click on the database name. Oh, the horrors at the time, but now it's become normal. But you had to choose to connect to the cube, and then you had to choose ad hoc. And I remember that being a bit tedious, but I fully did not see that all these different options that we'd have available. And so also what came up within Smart View at this time was that you had the ability to have that POV box. I can honestly say I've gone round and round over the past 10 years if I love it or I hate it, but honestly depends on what I'm using it for. So those were a lot of big differences from the add-in to Smart View back then. But if we think about, if you are a VBA person on the back end and you're thinking about, okay, well, what does that look like? You know, there's quite a few more steps. And so in the Excel add-in, it was just one, right? We had the SV Connect. And then, like I was saying, we had that sheet, but you could just leave that as a variable. And sorry if this can be more technical than some people wanted, but it says same 5 things, right? Give me the username, give me the password, give me the server, give me the application, give me the database name. Well, now within Smart View, because you really need to check, okay, am I connected? No. Okay, well then I need to connect. Well, does my connection exist? And then if it doesn't, let's create the connection. And then obviously this tends to be a little bit more complicated, but it's trying to do all the error checking. And so really what I want to highlight here is we can finally come down and say, okay, here's that X hype connect string that would more correlate to the SV connect up there. And it's really not that dissimilar. You just want to put a little bit more error checking in. In fact, I found it necessary at the time, or helpful at the time, perhaps, to say, to go through a flow, if you will, a data flow. Does this happen? How, whatever. All this to get down to start working with Smart View. So when I was brought in, like, learn how to respond to the drill instructors, really what this came down to is that the errors were a little bit different, and you had to learn what the errors were from add-in, which I think we all kind of knew because there's like 2 of them. But in Smart View, because there was more complexity, but there was more options that you could connect to through Smart View, that you kind of had to relearn what your errors were. So it wasn't as muscle memory as it was before, but you can go through, and one of the biggest ones that I had, and I believe this has been corrected, and if it hasn't, you guys can put in, tell me later in the chat that you're wrong, it still happens all the time, but it's making sure that activate button for that connection on that worksheet. And so even for VBA, you have this as far as, just an end user who could care less about VBA, but on the back end, the ability to choose activate versus select was the difference between night and day on my stuff working or not, is what it came down to. So also, if you have, freeform has been a hot topic, but this freeform that's on this sheet is not the same as a freeform Essbase. It's been discussed today, just so you guys know. But it's really basically saying if I put in hello world inside this pivot table, it's going to say, hey, this is all wrong. Don't do that. So it's basically saying it's going to give you, tell you like, hey, you need to clean up your act here. So, learning to respond, learning how to lay things out as you would need to. So have you guys noticed I haven't crossed anything out yet? The wild thing is I wrote some VBA about a year or 2 ago or so, helping a customer with that. And I actually went back to the same presentation for code to actually use. So everything that was applicable 10 years ago as far as migrating from the Essbase Add-In to SmartView has still been accepted. It's still there. And even when Matt looked at this earlier, I mean, there was nothing he came back, only that SmartView is 2 words is really what he came back with. So like I said, there's been a lot of enhancements in the tools. So like a lot of these, like, hey, make sure your connections are still active or whatever, those have actually been enhanced over the years. And if you want to call those a bug or enhancement, depends on, you know, how many old fashions I've had. I could go either way on it. But you always had the check, if you will. So whether you were actually using SmartView to make sure it was connected, or VBA just to make sure it was connected, those are kind of gone. So actually working with SmartView is a lot more fluid than it was in the past. So I'm going to, oh, so this one here, this was a really big error that I've been told it's been fixed, but I haven't been able to replicate the fixed part, if that makes sense. So one of the biggest problems that I had back 10 years ago is that if we were writing code, or if we were trying to submit data, if you will, lock and send, LNS, I still say lock and send, and people sometimes ask me, or they'll start laughing because I'm one of them, right? We all know what lock and send is, but here, let's go with submit data for the SmartView, is that they would ask you to refresh the data before you submitted it. And that absolutely drove me up the wall, because if I'm changing data, why in the world would I want to refresh it before I submit it? So I go through the next few slides talking about how I called it a creative workaround, I think. And the reality is there's no creative workarounds, or all workarounds are creative. And so at the time, you had to take a hidden worksheet, copy the data over, and then do a refresh, or either a hidden or a copied worksheet, depending on how you were setting this up. But you had your original worksheet, you copied the data over, then you did your refresh, and you put the data back, and then you hit submit. That's been addressed. And I think that's because for Matt Malello, for about 3 or 4 years, I screamed at him to fix it, even when he was no longer the SmartView product manager, but it still was an issue. Why in the world would you have to refresh your data before you submit it? It's been fixed, right? So even in here, I go into some of the details behind just making the SmartView work a little bit better. I think at this point, if you've been working with SmartView for any time at all, you probably already have these registry key settings values reset. And actually, if you guys are, if you have Essbase 19C, and I believe also with the EPM SaaS tools, this is already going to go ahead and be set for you at the application level. So there's a lot of things that the tool is doing better, taking care of for you, because it recognized that this was a problem 10 years ago, 5 years ago. If you're on premises, you had to do this, whereas in the cloud, that Oracle is actually taking care of you for in SmartView. And then also, like I had, if you're doing VBA, so sometimes it would take a really, really long time to pull data back, when the reality is if you just change it to command bar functions versus just using that, say, hype retrieve or something like that keyword, that actually calling the command bar and running the refresh or refresh all or submit data actually worked a lot better. So if you're using VBA and you're thinking like, well, do I have to get rid of it now that I'm going to cloud for EPM or for Essbase? No, you don't. Actually, VBA is still being updated for SmartView, for EPM, for OAC, for OBIE, for all these different pieces. So don't get rid of your VBA. You don't need to. You just need to convert it over to SmartView. A feature that I really enjoyed when SmartView came out, and I used it a lot, and it trailed off as the years went on, just because I moved from more as a report person on projects to more architect type roles, was that you had the ability to get away from using a point of view. You didn't have to set everything up as a pivot table, if you will. So what you could do, so before you had, there's a couple, okay, I forgot, this presentation is 10, 11 years old, so I'm going to take one step back here. So if you think about the pivot tables that you used to have in the Essbase Add-In, you can see the way that it was laid out here. So you kind of had to have you had to have all dimensions laid out. They could be repeating, non-repeating, whatever. So in the new way, you had this POV box. And like I said, catch me on a certain day and I love it, catch me on another day and I hate it. The reality is, it depends on if I was using Essbase or if I was developing Essbase. If I was trying to troubleshoot, then I hated it. If I was actually using it to retrieve data, then I kind of loved it, because it was a lot cleaner, right? And that goes into this title, learning how to clean. So we presented data in a much cleaner way. And then being able to create that POV box if you did use it. So like if you wanted to put multiple members into a box, it was just a matter of choosing which ones you want in that box. And so that when you decided to change your data pool from 2009 to say to 2010, you didn't have to go and type in or choose from the member selection box. You could actually just go ahead and have these already laid out for you. And what's nice too is that if you happen to change, say, this year from the POV box and you wanted to actually have it in the Excel range, if you will, you can just drag and drop it over and it would build out columns for you for 2009 and 2010. So it's smart to recognize, like, hey, you don't just want just one year, you want both years, and you want to compare those. So we'll drag and drop them in and let you have at it. So this is where I thought I was going with my slides, but I went somewhere else, is that this is the feature that I used quite a bit when I was developing reporting, is this HS get value and HS set value. And either some people you really know and you love it, or you just have no clue what it is. But it's really a way to be able to, within one cell, get data for a cube intersection without actually having to build out that pivot table. So what I loved about it is that, especially if we were trying to make some higher quality board decks or et cetera, that we could just go ahead and put in. You can see this example down at the bottom. You're essentially putting in, for all the different dimensions, you're giving it a member name and saying at this intersection. And that was really cool. And honestly, like I said, it's something that I should probably go back to using more often. But it was very nice for board decks. You didn't really have to go into you didn't have to have hidden tabs or anything else like that. So what's really cool too is that you could use cell references. So you didn't have to say scenario equals actual, year equals 2009. What you could come in and do is actually reference cells. And so if you're looking here, this period equals C2, then we could reference in either another book or reference somewhere else. Maybe we have our initial page which kind of drives all the data pools. We could go ahead and have it referenced. So it could be dynamic. So here's scenario version. So if you have the same report, but you want to be able to filter it maybe on a drop down, this option became available to you, and you didn't have to go and retrieve a range of a pivot table. You could actually just pull one cell value. And on the back end, it was actually really fast too. It was really nice. So you had the get value, so hey, do the retrieve. Now let me do the submit. So the HS set value was essentially that same thing. So if you had data that you wanted to send back, if you want to lock and send, see what I did, or submit data back to Essbase, then you had the option here of using the set value. So you could just hit, submit data or whatever, and it would just go for you. And this was actually really nice too. So if you have end users who are entering in, I always like to use the currency conversion rates because I feel like I've done that for 15 years. This is really good for that. So if you want to pull it from another spreadsheet, you would have that option to do. Again, it's possible to reference cells. So I felt necessary at that 10 years ago to tell you that at the time. But what's really nice here is that function builder. Like at that time, I kind of had everything memorized, but it gave you an option to actually build out the function. And that screenshot is really tiny, so I apologize. But it's basically, and I'm looking at it too, that HS get value and what it looks like, so you don't have to memorize it. You can just build it out. That still exists. That is still there, underused, in my opinion. So my first conclusion, this is my 2010 conclusion, if you will, that no, SmartView is not really like the add-in, but it does the same things, but it does more. And so maybe some simplicity is lost, but that's only because SmartView does a whole lot more, and it connects to a whole lot more, and it gives you options to do a lot more. So I'm going to skip over the rest of this just because I want to go ahead and get to, quote unquote, the current conclusion, if you will. Oh yeah, so I did include some good information here that when you're doing the VBA code changes, there actually are converters out there that will help you out. There's one for one to just about everything. There's actually more available to you in SmartView at VBA than there is in Essbase Add-In VBA. So you may need to make some changes, but you can follow this loosely, but you'll need to follow it one by one, because it's not as rigid. It's still rigid, but it's not as rigid as it used to be. So I could probably take this off if I wanted to, and then put back on my running clothes, because that's what I normally wear. So it's definitely more free. Okay, I'm going to skip over this too, because I thought it was important back then to have 3 conclusions. So the question is, and that's what we're asking today, is How has SmartView held up in the past 10, 15 years? The reality is it's still being around. It's still around. It's still being updated. And actually, I was listening yesterday to Al Marciani and Dave Roberts talk about SmartView, that they're updating it quarterly. So if you never made the change from Essbase Add-In to SmartView because you thought it might change or go away, I think you're really behind the curve at this point, because they've clearly shown that this is the go forward path. They're adding things to it, and then quarterly too. So we're not just talking, and they focus more on the EPM SaaS route, but it really has to do with Essbase on premises, Essbase in the cloud, and the analytics cloud, and also some other tools I'll show in a second. So if you haven't moved yet, you really do need to. Because not only eventually you're going to have to update your tool set that you have right now. So if you're on 11.124 for Essbase, guess what? You're gonna need to move that up. If you're on if you're on planning 11.124 as well, you're gonna need to move to 11.2 or PBCS. But you can see these additional tool sets that over the course of 15 years that SmartView added. So you had SQR reports and Visual Explorer. By the way, those are dead. If you have those, that functionality has been moved to the Analytics Cloud, and it's OBIE, which is now the Analytics Cloud. And SQR, fun fact, 3 weeks ago, I had a customer ask for new licenses of SQR. So we kind of had to have a heart-to-heart with them about that. But Visual Explorer and SQR are still out there in the wild, but those are no longer supported because, well, they aren't there anymore. But I'm not going to read through all of these, but the reality is you can see that as additional modules came out for planning, for EPM, for HFM, all these different pieces, and eventually when they all move to the cloud, so you have all the EPM cloud sources, SmartView is the way to interact with this if you are not actually in the URL. So even narrative reporting, which is Hyperion Financial Reports, on steroids now in the cloud, which I love it, I really do. That's supported as well. And then if I want to talk about the planning admin extension, so the ability to administer your planning cube within SmartView, that was extended to PPCS, which has also been extended to Essbase 19C, now 21C. It's giving you additional functionality and additional administration options than what you have on premises. And if we drop all the way down, so you still had OBIE. So if you wanted, so that was a really big deal with OBIE, is that you could bring in, if you had any kind of analyses or dashboards or reports or whatever that you wanted to bring into Excel, either as you could bring it as a picture, like a JPEG, whatever, or you could bring it in actually as a Excel graph and interact with it as it were just normal data. But you can also go and hit refresh or retrieve, and it's going to pull data live back from your BI instance. That's now available in OAC as well. But then obviously Essbase, and then ERP Cloud was one that I didn't realize was supported until yesterday, watching some of this stuff. So it really, I feel like I need to beg and plead with those of you who are still on the add-in, because it really could be a next dot release of any kind of hardware, software, or anything else that could break your migration or break your connection, if you will. SmartView really is the go forward, and this is something that's constantly being updated. And so I did a cumulative feature release, and let me pull it up here real quick. I pulled this up end of last week to see how many features have come out since the first release of SmartView, and there's 205. So clearly, and I think the most recent one was 11.125.910, which came out just a couple months ago. So you can see that even a couple months ago, the function builder was talking to HS, get value, set value, and OBIE and all this. It's all still there, health checks. So it's not just where if you think about the add-in as is just a way to pull data from Essbase, SmartView is really how you're going to interact with your performance management tools now and in the future. And so it's no longer just a data retrieval tool or data submission tool. It's actually your web forms. It's going to be managing journals or whatever in financial close consolidation. It's going to be managing dashboards. It's a way to, without having to be connected through a URL link, and still being able to access your data. So now the real final conclusion, if you didn't hear me say it before, you're going to hear me say it again. The Excel add-in is no longer supported. All right, 2013 was the last time it was supported. So if you call up and all of a sudden everything breaks, call up to support and they say my add-in doesn't work, and say, well, sorry, you know, this has been long dead, 8 years. I've been harping on the additional securities and functionalities and all that. But to be real, you've had a decade to migrate. There are definitely things that we can send you to help you migrate, and there are definitely partners who can help out with that. And it's not necessarily a hard process. I think actually one of my most attended presentations ever was about 6 years ago, when I talked about the change management behind going from the add-in to SmartView. That really is less about functionality and more about change management within your organization. And so I'm happy to pull that one back out from the cobwebs if that's going to help you migrate your organization. But I mean, even when I was at NRL, we helped people migrate to SmartView. We're happy. All of us are essentially happy to do that for you, or to help you with that. And like I said, this really comes down to muscle memory. I would love to have the keyboard hotkeys again to be able to refresh the data, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. So, and if you have not migrated yet and you need to download SmartView, this link is for you. So please use it. Please really use it. So that's the path forward. It is what it is, right? So 3:41, I had made 4 minutes left to spare. So I'm going to check quick here to see if I don't see any questions, but I see a chat. Yes, Opal, I miss Appman too. So the funny thing is, here's a side story for you, is about 3 years ago, I was working with a customer who was still on version 6. They still had, and they wanted to move to OAC Essbase. So imagine going from 6 to the cloud, skipping everything in between. We couldn't open their outline. And so I actually had to reach out. I don't know if you guys know who Tim German is. I had to reach out to him to get a version of Appman and then try to run Appman on my Mac. I got it to work, and that's the way we got them migrated, no problem. So all the rules files came over, calc scripts, all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of fun. But then we had to tell them they had to use SmartView, and it was funny. Appman versus OAC Essbase admin was easier for them to change over than it was from Excel, the Essbase add-in to SmartView, but we got them there. So, all right. So not seeing any questions. This will be available. I have a version out there that's not up to date, so I'll make sure that this one is sent over to the NRL crew so that they have the most up to date. If you have any questions, reach out to me. My email address is my first name dot last name, my married name, not Cranen. Go for Zumbrum. I thought I had a name tape around here, but sarah.zumbrum@oracle.com. We'll be happy to help you out. Like I said, yeah, there's a lot out there. So, all right. Thanks. That's all I got, host.